I raised my son to be kind, gentle, grateful. I thought I had done right by him. But nothing prepares you for the moment your own child calls and says, "Mom, it's better if you don't come. Sarah doesn't want you at dinner." The words didn't just sting. They hollowed me out. I sat there staring at the empty plate I had brought as a gift, wondering where I had gone so wrong. I always thought I raised Daniel well. He was the kind of boy who shared his toys, who said thank you without being reminded, who hugged me every morning before school and every night before bed. After his father passed, it was just the two of us for a long time. We didn't have much, but we had peace. I worked double shifts at the pharmacy while Daniel studied and helped out at home. There were nights I came home so tired I couldn't even eat, but he'd be there with a warm plate and that quiet smile of his. He never asked for much. When he finally introduced me to Sarah, I was happy for him. He was 35, steady in his career, and ready to settle down. Sarah was polite. Put together, she wore those clean, neutral, colored clothes and spoke with the kind of precision that made you feel like everything she said had been edited twice in her head before it came out of her mouth. I remember she brought a bottle of wine and a box of fancy chocolates the first time she came over. I thought she was sweet, maybe just a little formal. Some people take time to warm up. We had dinner that night, just the three of us. And I noticed she barely touched the food. I'd made lentil stew and rice, the kind Daniel used to beg for as a boy. She pushed it around politely, said she had a small appetite. I didn't take offense. I figured she just wasn't used to home-style cooking. Not everyone grows up on simple things. Their wedding was small, tasteful, and rather quiet. It was held at a country venue Sarah's family had picked out. They'd hired a wedding planner and didn't ask for much input from me. I offered, gently, to help with arrangements, or perhaps make the favors by hand, but Sarah smiled in that way she always did, polite but distant, and told me, "No thank you, we've got it covered." I understood. I didn't want to intrude. I stood in the second row, in a light blue dress I'd saved for months to buy, and I smiled through the whole ceremony. Because Daniel looked happy. That's all that mattered. After they married, things seemed all right. We spoke often enough, though it was usually me who called. I'd offer to come by, bring some baked goods or run an errand, and Sarah always had a reason why it wasn't a good time. "The place is a mess," or "We've got company," or "Maybe next weekend." Daniel never said much, just that they were getting used to married life. Then Emily was born. My first grandchild. Oh, I cried when Daniel called to tell me. I couldn't wait to hold her. When I first saw her, that tiny little thing, wrapped up like a pink burrito in the hospital, I felt a piece of my heart move in a way I hadn't felt in decades. She had Daniel's eyes and Sarah's chin. I brought her a handmade blanket and whispered blessings into her soft little ear. I offered to help in those early weeks. Cooking, cleaning, anything. But again, Sarah was polite and distant. She said they had it under control, that her mother was staying for a while to help. I tried not to feel left out. Not everyone knows how to ask for help. Months passed. I saw Emily now and then. I'd get the occasional picture via text. A video of her first steps. A picture of her birthday cake. I wasn't invited to the party, but they sent me photos after. I told myself it was probably a small gathering, maybe just a few friends. But the distance grew. Conversations became shorter, always scheduled. They started treating visits like appointments. "We can do Sunday at 2, just for an hour," Daniel would say. I'd nod and show up with a smile and a bag of something home cooked. Sarah would greet me with a careful nod and retreat to the kitchen or take a call in the other room. Then, one day at the grocery store, I was buying flour when I heard a familiar giggle. I turned around, and there she was, Emily, bouncing in the cart, wearing little overalls with daisies on them. I rushed over, my heart fluttering, and said, "There's my girl." she squealed, "Nana," and held her arms out. Before I could hug her, Sarah stepped forward. She gave me that same tight smile and said, "Oh, hi." Just that. No warmth, no joy. I stood there, trying to ignore the awkwardness. "She's grown so much," I said gently. "Yes," Sarah replied, adjusting her scarf. Then she picked Emily up, turned the cart around, and said, "We're on a bit of a schedule," before walking away. I stood there in the baking aisle, holding a bag of sugar I no longer needed, wondering what I'd done wrong. I hadn't said anything offensive. I hadn't even asked to hold her. But I felt like a stranger, like someone who had interrupted something important. On the way home, I thought about all the little moments, the way Sarah always kept her tone measured, the way Daniel avoided talking too deeply, the way Emily's birthday was always something I found out about after the fact. I thought maybe I was imagining it all. Maybe I was being sensitive, but something inside me knew. This wasn't just a matter of schedules or modern parenting. Something else was at play. I held on to hope. That maybe, one day, things would change. That maybe Sarah would soften, Daniel would speak up, and Emily would grow up knowing her Nana. But I didn't know then that things were about to get worse, and much clearer. I spent the rest of that week in a haze. I went about my days, watering the plants, folding laundry, preparing meals for one. But something inside me felt off balance. I kept replaying the moment in the grocery store. The way Sarah walked away. The way Emily looked back over her shoulder, confused, maybe even a little sad. I told myself not to overthink, that people have moods, that maybe Sarah was just having a bad day. But deep down I knew. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. A slow freezing over of something that used to be warm. The next Sunday, I decided to try again. I cooked Daniel's favorite lentil stew, the same one I'd made when he was a boy. I let it simmer for hours, just the way he liked. Rich, seasoned with cumin and bay leaves. I packed it into glass containers, wrapped a soft toy for Emily, and even wrote a short note for Sarah, thanking her for taking care of my son and granddaughter, and telling her I hoped we could all sit together for a meal soon. Before I left the house, I texted Daniel, "I'd love to drop by Sunday dinner, just for a bit. Miss you all." I waited, watched the little dots on the screen come and go. Then the reply came, "Mom, Sarah says it's better if it's just us. She wants to keep dinner quiet. I hope you understand." I stared at the message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. So many responses passed through my mind: anger, hurt, confusion. But in the end, I typed just 2 words. "Of course." And I meant it. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because arguing wouldn't change what had already been decided without me. That evening, I placed the food in the fridge and sat down alone at the table. I didn't light the candles like I usually did. I didn't turn on the soft jazz that usually filled the quiet. I just sat there, staring at the empty seat across from me, remembering all the Sundays when Daniel used to sit there, feet swinging under the table, asking for more stew, telling me about school or the cartoons he loved. I wondered if Sarah even knew those stories. If she knew how gentle he'd always been. How when he was 9, he once brought home a baby bird with a broken wing and refused to eat dinner until he was sure it had been fed and warmed. How, even as a teenager, he never raised his voice to me, not once. I wondered if she saw the same boy I did, or if he'd changed to fit into her world. The following week, I went for a walk to clear my mind. The park near my house is small, with old oak trees and a worn-out swing set that creaks in the wind. I like it there. It reminds me of slower times. As I turned the corner by the duck pond, I heard laughter. Familiar laughter. Daniel's. And then, a child's squeal. High and joyous. I looked up and saw them. Daniel, Sarah, and little Emily. They were sitting on a blanket under one of the trees, eating sandwiches and fruit out of little plastic containers. Emily was running in circles, her arms spread wide like a bird. She spotted me first. "Nana?" she shouted, her face lighting up. She ran toward me, arms open. Before I could bend down, Sarah stood. She moved quickly, not frantic, just firm. She reached Emily, took her hand, and said something I couldn't hear. Emily looked back at me, puzzled. I smiled and waved. Sarah looked at me, gave a brief nod, almost mechanical, and then guided Emily back to the blanket. Daniel looked away. He didn't say anything. He didn't even wave. I stood there for a moment longer, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to make a scene. I turned around and walked slowly back toward the edge of the park. My chest felt tight, like something heavy was sitting just below my ribs. I didn't cry. Not then. But the pain followed me home. The next day, Daniel came by. Alone. He brought a small bag of groceries. A few fruits, some bread, a carton of milk. "I thought you might need these," he said, setting them on the counter. I didn't ask him why he was really there. I knew. We sat on the couch. I offered him tea. He declined. There was a silence between us. Not angry, but fragile, like glass between our words. Finally I asked, softly, "Did I do something wrong?" "Daniel." He looked down at his hands. Rubbed them together slowly. "No, Mom. It's just Sarah feels like. Sometimes you make her feel judged. Like you're watching her every move." I was quiet. "I don't say anything," I said almost in a whisper. "I know," he said quickly, "but she still feels it." There it was. Not something I'd done, just something I was. Present. A reminder. Maybe a shadow of a life that didn't fit into the image Sarah wanted. I nodded slowly. "All right." Daniel looked relieved. He leaned back, tried to change the subject, asked about the garden, the neighbors. I answered, politely, like a guest in my own home. After he left, I looked at the bag he'd brought. I didn't need the groceries. My pantry was full. But I think that was his way of easing the guilt. A quiet exchange. He couldn't bring his family to me, but he could bring apples and milk. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the window. Outside, the world moved as if nothing had happened. Birds chirped. A dog barked down the lane. Children rode their bikes, laughing, unaware of the silent heartbreak tucked behind lace curtains in homes like mine. That night, I stood by the mirror and looked at myself. Really looked, at the soft lines near my eyes, the silver in my hair, the tiredness in my shoulders, and I wondered, when did being a mother become something that had to be negotiated? I didn't have answers. Only the echo of a quiet goodbye that hadn't yet been spoken aloud. A few nights after Daniel's visit, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table long, after the lights were off in the rest of the neighborhood. The silence in the house had grown heavier lately, like it knew what I was finally willing to admit something had broken. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly, softly, but completely. I told myself I didn't need answers, that I should just let it be, but something kept gnawing at me, that feeling you get when someone rewrites the story of who you are, and you're not allowed to defend yourself. I wasn't judgmental. I wasn't hovering. I was just there. Loving them, offering help, showing up. Was that wrong? The next morning I did something I wouldn't normally do. I walked down the street to visit my neighbor's daughter, Lena. She's 17, smart, kind, always willing to help me when my phone freezes or the TV gets confused. I asked if she could help me check something online. She smiled and welcomed me in, and I hesitated before saying it. "I want to see Sarah's social media." Lena raised her eyebrows but didn't ask questions. She pulled out her phone and began searching. Within minutes, I was staring at a world I hadn't known existed. There were photos. Dozens of them, birthday parties, family dinners, holidays. Sarah's parents, her siblings, friends from her side, all gathered around tables filled with food, candles, balloons. There were captions like, "Family is everything," and "So grateful for our tribe." In one post, Emily was blowing out birthday candles in a dress I hadn't seen before. Her cake was shaped like a unicorn, and the background was decorated with streamers and golden stars. I hadn't even known there was a party. And then, a comment, short, sharp. Sarah's mother had written, "So proud of how you've built boundaries with his side. You deserve peace." And Sarah's reply, "Finally feels like we're living our own life now." My throat tightened. I asked Lena to close it. I walked home slowly, not even noticing the breeze or the birds or the flowers pushing up through sidewalk cracks. It felt like I had seen the truth under a harsh, fluorescent light. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. It wasn't about me being too quiet or too eager. I was a reminder of a life Daniel had before Sarah, a life that didn't match her polished, curated world. She hadn't just kept me at arm's length, she had erased me. That night, I didn't cry. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the golden light fade into dusk, and I thought about what it means to love someone who slowly turns their back to you. Not with anger, but with indifference. That quiet forgetting, that deliberate silence. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't message Sarah. What was there say? I had seen everything I needed to see. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. It was a soft knock, not urgent, not rehearsed. Just light taps, like a question waiting to be asked. When I opened it, there she was, Emily, holding a piece of paper folded carefully in half. Behind her stood a young woman I didn't recognize. Probably a babysitter. Sarah wasn't there. Daniel wasn't there. Emily beamed. "Nana, I made you a drawing." I knelt down and opened the paper. It was done in bright crayon. A house, a big sun, a stick figure woman with white hair holding a heart. "I love you, Nana," it read in crooked letters. I looked at her, and something in my chest gave way. I held her gently, not with desperation, but with a love that had learned to stand on its own. "I missed you," she whispered into my shoulder. "I missed you too," I said quietly. The babysitter smiled politely, said they had to go soon. Emily gave me one last hug and ran back down the path, waving as she left. I stood in the doorway long after they'd gone, holding the paper in my hand. It didn't fix anything. It didn't mean I was welcome again. But it reminded me of something I had forgotten in all the silence. Love, when it's real, finds a way. Not always the way you want, not always the way it once was. But it finds a path. Later that evening, I sat by the window again, the drawing propped against the lamp. The house was quiet, but not heavy. I knew things wouldn't go back to how they used to be. I wouldn't be at birthday parties. I wouldn't be at Sunday dinners, and I had stopped expecting phone calls that never came. But I also knew that love wasn't measured by seats at a table. It wasn't decided by who gets invited to what. Sometimes love is a folded piece of paper in a child's hand. Sometimes it's silence that doesn't ache anymore. Sometimes it's just choosing peace. Not because they offered it, but because you needed it. I didn't feel erased anymore. I felt clear. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't ask why he let it happen this way, or if he even noticed how it unfolded. I didn't press him for explanations or apologies. There was nothing more I needed to hear. I had seen enough. And more importantly, I had felt enough. Instead, I wrote him a letter. Not out of bitterness. Not to blame. Just to speak clearly for the first time, without fear of being too emotional or too quiet to be heard. I told him I loved him, that I was proud of the man he became. Thoughtful, responsible, always gentle. I reminded him of the little boy who once tried to fix a broken bird's wing, the teenager who used to sit at my table telling me about dreams he was afraid to say aloud to anyone else. I told him that I understood things change. People grow, partners influence each other, homes are built differently from the ones we came from. And that's all right. But I also told him this. I won't go where I'm not wanted. I won't knock on doors that stay closed. And I won't apologize for simply loving my family. I said my door will always remain open. Not as a condition, not as a test, just as a quiet fact. Because love, real love, doesn't need to chase. It just needs to remain steady, even when everything else shifts. That Saturday, I placed a small box just outside my door and labeled it Emily's Corner. Inside, I tucked a picture book, a pair of knitted mittens, and a cookie wrapped in wax paper. I didn't know if anyone would come by. I didn't expect anything, but it felt right, like planting seeds in a place you may never see bloom, but trusting something will still grow. The box sat untouched the first week. The second week, it was gone, and in its place was a thank you note written in colored pencil. The words were clumsy, spelled halfway wrong, but I recognized the spirit behind them. Thank you, Nana. I liked the cookie. I smiled, and I cried, but quietly, the way old hearts do when they're learning to heal. Over time, it became our ritual. Every Saturday, I'd leave something. Sometimes a note, sometimes a drawing, a small toy, a tiny scarf I made from leftover yarn, and sometimes the box came back full, with a leaf Emily found in the park, or a sticker from a storybook she wanted to share. It wasn't everything, but it was something, a thread between us. I started living again, not the way I once did, with full tables and long conversations and the sound of children's feet running down my hall, but in new ways. I taught a few neighborhood kids how to knit. I joined a small book circle at the community center. I planted herbs in the back garden. Mint, rosemary, basil. Their smell reminded me that the smallest things can still offer something good. I even started writing little stories for children. Not to publish, not to show anyone, just to get the feelings out. Stories about girls with big hearts and quiet strength. About birds who get lost and find their way back. About grandmothers with magical teacups and secret gardens. One afternoon, I sat with my tea and realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours. There were no missed calls, no urgent messages, and yet I didn't feel forgotten. I felt steady, at peace. Not because I got everything I wanted, but because I stopped needing what was no longer mine to carry. I used to think family was about closeness. Holidays, photos, shared dinners, and yes, sometimes it is, but sometimes it's also about letting go, about loving someone enough to give them space, even if that space means you're no longer in the center of their world. But even so, you can still love them from where you are, quietly, without expectation, without begging to be seen. Because love doesn't always look like it does in stories. Sometimes, it's just the choice to remain kind when you've been shut out. To keep your heart soft when the world hardens around you. To leave the porch light on, even if no one comes. That's the kind of love I've chosen now. I've learned that sometimes, the hardest kind of love is the one that steps back quietly, without bitterness. The kind that lets others choose their distance, but still keeps the door unlocked, just in case. If you've ever loved someone who no longer made space for you, but you chose grace over anger, you are not alone. Leave a comment with the word, grace, if this story touched something true in you. And remember, the love we give without condition may not always return the way we hope, but it always leaves something beautiful behind.